Welcome to Drawsh Studio. Today we will discuss light logic so we can apply value to our drawings. Let's get started. We can only see something if light hits a form and bounces back to our eyes. When light hits a form, it creates a consistent pattern of light and shadow we call the 5 properties of light. We can identify and recreate this pattern to draw the look of three-dimensional objects on a two-dimensional surface. No light means no sight, so if we turn the lights on, light will hit the surface of a form and gradually fall away. We call this area of light the halftone. Within this area of light, one portion of the form will reflect light directly to your eye, making this the brightest spot. This spot is called the highlight. When light hits a surface, it bounces or reflects off of it. Some of that light will bounce back into the form, but with less intensity, creating reflected light. We can think of a super bouncy ball thrown into a room. Each surface it bounces off of takes some of its energy. The same happens to reflected light, which is why it won't be as bright as the direct light in the halftone. The darkest area on the form is where the least amount of light reaches, which is usually between the halftone and reflected light. It is called the core shadow. A form will also block light from reaching other surfaces. The shadow is cast by the object, so it is a cast shadow. Here they are. All 5 properties of light: highlight, halftone, core shadow, reflected light, and cast shadow. Without all 5 properties of light, your drawings won't appear to have the volume of the three-dimensional world. There are also repeatable patterns that happen with shadows. We can call these the 3 properties of shadow. The first property is a cast shadow is darker closer to the object and gets lighter as it moves away from the object. The second property is a cast shadow is harder edged closer to the object and gets softer edged the further it moves from the object. The third property is that if we compare a core shadow and a cast shadow, the shadow on the form is overall softer than the harder edged cast shadow. If we pay attention to these subtleties in the shadows, our drawings will look even more realistic. Next, we will look at how these memorizable patterns look on the different basic forms. Your brain has memorized these properties to navigate our three-dimensional world. It is how you know you can pour coffee into the open end of your mug, that a pillow is soft and round, or an animal's tooth is sharp and pointy. We simply need to become aware of what we already know. Spheres are curved, and curves have gradual plane changes. This means there will be soft, gradual transitions between the properties of light. Cubes are made of flat planes with abrupt changes. The transitions will be subtle across the flat areas and hard at the plane changes. Highlights and core shadows often happen at the edges of these plane changes. Cylinders have gradual plane changes, so they have soft transitions, much like a sphere but in straight bands of value. Depending on where the light is placed, halftone will be on either side of the highlight as light rolls around the form. When a cylinder has an open end, the pattern of light reverses on the inside planes. Cones have gradual plane changes like a cylinder, except the bands of light and shadow will taper towards the point of the cone. So far we have looked at the objects with a single direct light source. This usually creates the clearest 5 properties of light and showcases the form in the best way. However, there are other lighting conditions. This example shows multiple light sources, 2 to be exact, which we can tell because of the 2 different cast shadows. Notice there still remains some indication of the 5 properties of light, but the 2 light sources make the properties overlap. We still can recognize it as a sphere, but the design of the light and shadow isn't clear. Another lighting condition is ambient lighting. Ambient light is reflected light from multiple surfaces, but this is the least ideal to showcase form. We don't see the 5 properties of light here. We still recognize it as a sphere because of the very subtle value shifts. Using a single direct light source is your best option for clearly creating volume, but play with your light to find the angle that best creates the 5 properties of light. A low light source creates long shadows. A high light source creates short shadows. A distant light source creates softer light and shadow. A closer light source creates more intense light. Putting your light directly above, in front, behind, or at either side can minimize the 5 properties of light and create confusing form. And when you have multiple objects, pay attention to how the shadows cast on the other objects. Play with the position of your light to create clarity of form and interesting light and shadow shapes. The material or surface of an object may change how light or dark it appears. Objects that are soft or textured will diffuse the light as it bounces off. This toilet paper is made up of tiny fibers that create soft transitions between the properties of light. Shiny or smooth surfaces like this plastic container can create more intense light and darks and have bright, hard-edged highlights called specular highlights. Notice the difference between these two figures. The left is made of a slightly textured plaster. The right is glazed ceramic. The plaster has softer, more gradual highlights, whereas the ceramic has the bright specular highlights. Transparent or reflective objects can defy the 5 properties of light and create hard value transitions with intense reflections. We'll need different strategies to draw these kinds of objects, and that's a topic for another video. But how light or dark do we draw each section of our object? We can use a concept of a value scale to help us. A value scale starts with a 0 value of white and goes to a 10 value of black, with a gradation of steps between. A value scale puts the tone of each section of our object in context to each other so we can understand how light or dark to draw each section of our object. Because drawing and painting usually starts with a white surface that we add value to, we number our scale as 0 equaling pure white and 10 equaling pure black. But other disciplines like photography reverse these numbers, but the concept is always the same. We need to carefully observe each section and relate them to the position on a value scale. At first, it will be hard for your eye to pick up the subtleties between values. To help, we can squint at the subject, which will help you see value relationships more clearly. Also, it is a learned skill, and the more you look, the more you will see, so keep at it. But different objects may have different values depending on the basic value of the object. We call the basic value of an object the local value. To understand the local value of an object, we need to find a spot without strong light or shadow on it. This is usually in the halftone area. The local value helps us put each object in the value range it belongs in. But color can affect our perception, so we need to look through the color and see only its value. To help us do this, we need to squint at the object and relate each section to a value scale. Another way we can understand value is through the contrast and key of an object. Some images or objects have a wide range of values and others don't. The lightest part of this object is a 1 value and the darkest is a 9, so we would say it is high contrast. This range is called its key. Finding the key of an object or a whole image helps us relate all the values to a value scale and make our images more accurate. However, depending on the intensity of the light source or the object's local value, the subject may use a more narrow range of values. When an object or image is overall light, it is called high key. When an object or image is overall dark, it is called low key. In this high key image, the lightest is a 1 value, and it has a very small dark area that is a 7 value. In this low key image, the lightest area is a 6 value, and the darkest area is a 9 value. Even though these images have different keys, they still appear round because they have all 5 properties of light. Make sure to squint to help you see the overall key of the subject and put all the values in context to each other. But something else will affect the appearance of value. Squint at these 2 circles and decide which is the brightest. It's probably obvious the right circle is much brighter than the left, but they are actually both a 1 value. Linking them together with a bar that is a 1 value helps us see they are the same. The one on the right appears brighter because it is surrounded by dark. This means values appear relative, or when one value is next to a contrasting value, it will feel more intense than it actually is. A good example of this is the area of reflected light. Students often make this area too bright in their drawings because it sits between the dark values of the core shadow and cast shadow. Even though it appears bright, if we squint at it, we can see that it is not as bright as the halftone area. Relating the values to a value scale shows us that the reflected light is between a 4 and 7 value, whereas the halftone area is mostly a 2 value. Squinting and putting all the values in context to each other with a value scale is how we render the light and shadow realistically. Let's do a quick review of how to depict light and shadow in our drawings. Make sure you have all 5 properties of light and 3 properties of shadow. Pay attention to the plane changes and the material. Relate each value to a position on the value scale. And think about the key of the object and the surrounding values for accurate observations. Don't forget to squint to help you see value relationships more clearly, and just keep practicing. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to go to Drawsh.com for more information on these topics and many more. If you want to see more videos like this, like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one.